Hey everybody, Robert with RC Archery, and you're watching Tuesday's Tip of the Week number 98. In this week's video, we're going to expand on what we talked about in our last video, and I'm actually going to go over how to set up your draw length and your loop length based off of using some of the techniques and some of the processes that we talked about in that last video. If you haven't watched that one yet, I'll put a link here. Check that one out first. Go step by step over creating steadiness in our shot, what we're actually looking at doing, what we're using, what muscles we're using and what parts of our bodies we're using. Today's video, I'm gonna break down draw length into two different segments. We're gonna have the draw length of the actual bow, the draw length of ourself, how those mesh and match together, and then the loop length on the bow, and then also how that meshes with our body's draw length. And really what I mean by our body's draw length is if you were to stand in a mirror or stand in front of a camera or whatever you want to do and hold yourself up like you were at full draw without a bow and just see where your body ends up, that is a big indicator of being able to use that to look at what you're needing when you actually set up the bow. So for me, if I'm set up like this, I'm going to put my hand here and anchor. I'm going to make sure that I'm engaging my scapula on my release arm side and getting into an anchor point just like I would with the bow. And if you look at this position here, this is going to be extremely similar to what you see with my position with the bow in my hand. And that's because my shoulders are down in a natural position. My release arm shoulder is not hooked around or pushed back, meaning that there's a loop length, being too short, being too long, something wrong like that. And then my bow arm shoulder is raised from my side in a natural position. This lets the joint be supported in the best way. It keeps you from being outstretched in the joint and the muscles here not being able to stabilize you. It keeps you from being scrunched up and also having problems with your joint. So the biggest factor with this that I will go through and give you one more video that you can check out is the way that we set up our stance. Now, I have a natural point of aim and a method that I use in my coaching to help people find the perfect stance for them. But if you want to just diagnose this yourself and try to get an idea and understand it, I will link another video here. It's actually the most viewed video on my channel. Doesn't have great audio quality, unfortunately, but it does give you a very good description and visual on our foot placement and what that does to our hips and our shoulders and what that does to stabilizing our bow shoulder. I've rambled on enough here, guys. Let's get started. All right, guys, as I talked about in the intro, the first step in what we're doing here is we want to match our bow's draw length to our body's natural draw length. We don't want to have to adjust our shoulder or tilt our head forward or backwards or do any kind of body movements or weird stuff to get into anchor. So you can see here, this is multiple shots of me just drawing back and getting into anchor. And a few things that I want to point out here is looking at the way that I am raising my arm up in order to start this process. My arm is not outstretched and it's not shoved into its socket. It's just a natural of my arm, motion of my arm moving upwards, just like I would if there wasn't a bow in my hand at all. And from this point, I'm actually just drawing the bow back. And if you're doing this at home, don't adjust your body. Leave your arm in that natural position, your shoulder in that natural position, and draw the bow back. Don't try to move your head. Ideally, you may want to just keep your eyes closed because you don't want to adjust to the peep sight either. You don't want to do any of these things that you have to change you for the mechanical device in your hand. We want to be able to see where we're at as a starting point. Ideally, what you're looking for is as you get to anchor, you want to be able to see that that string comes to your face where your nose is and to the corner of your mouth, roughly somewhere in there. Depending on axle to axle of the bow, string angles, it can vary a little bit. Depending on how you like to anchor, that can vary a little bit. But you don't want to have the string in this drill coming way back behind your nose, and you don't want to have it in front of your nose, and then you start adjusting. If you run into a situation like that and the string won't come back to your face, you need to adjust the draw length out longer. And the same thing if you're running this drill here and that string comes back behind your face, behind your nose rather, then your draw length is too long. So you're going to want to shorten that down. This may mean that you are in between 1/2 inch movements or maybe even 1/4 inch movements if you have that adjustment on your bow. So keep that in mind. When you're getting into the fine tuning of this, you may need to adjust with your string, you may need to adjust with the cables, maybe even the limb bolts a little bit, depending on how you want to do this and micro tune this draw length. All right, the next thing that we're going to look at in this equation is our loop length. This one is really looked over and it's actually misunderstood by a lot of people. You might see this on a lot of forums, a lot of Facebook groups, things like that, where people will say, if I get X release with a short neck on it, then will that allow me to have a 1/2 inch longer on my draw length? And sadly, no. You are either T-Rex arms or you're not. And that's just how this works. You're not just going to be able to gain speed by lengthening out a draw length because you use a short loop or a short neck on a release, unless you're willing to sacrifice your accuracy and repeatability. Now, if that's what you want to do, that is your decision. You know, I mean, I don't know what to say to that, but in my opinion, I'm looking at this as let's find the most accurate position for our equipment to be in, to allow our body to also be in its most accurate position. And that allows us, whether we're hunting, to come back to a natural positioning to where if you're in the moment and there's adrenaline pumping and there's a lot going on around you, you don't have to think about scrunching up somewhere in order to be able to get a good shot on an animal. You just have to get to full draw, and it's a natural body position for you to be in full draw. Same thing goes with target archery. You got adrenaline pumping, you're nervous, you know, you're in a shoot off, or you're just in your first tournament, or you're in your 100th tournament where you're nervous. You don't want to have to worry about what your body is doing. You want it to just be in a natural position. So one thing that you can see here is that when I get to full draw, my arm, the height of my elbow and the angle it creates through my release hand is very similar to where it looked prior to all this when we were just showing our body's natural form when I was in my intro of this video. If for some reason your elbow you're noticing is really high, then that's a pretty good indicator that your loop is typically too short, so you need to lengthen it out. And if your elbow is really low, that's generally an indicator that your loop is too long and you need to shorten it down. Now there are some variances to this, and there are some times where this doesn't take place the same way as what I just said. And typically what I am seeing in an archer when I'm coaching them and working with them when this doesn't work out is they are manually adjusting their body, essentially. So the big telltale sign is, what is your shoulder doing on your release side? Is it in line roughly with the bow shoulder and the arrow and the target? Is it what I would call inside of that, meaning that you're too short on everything, you can't get the shoulder to come back and get into alignment, and your elbow is cocked out to the right of your body if you're right-handed, just kind of inside. If you're doing that and then you're bending the wrist or adjusting your elbow or doing something weird, that's giving you a false positive. It's just showing you that you got to get that shoulder back in line. And in that case, you need a longer loop. Now the same can happen if you have too long of a loop and you've got, your shoulder is pulled back too far. It's allowing the elbow to go back around behind your head too far. It can be high or low, because some people will start bending their wrist trying to bring their elbow back up, because you lose all your leverage when this happens, when you get too long like that. And that's their way of trying to fix it. So again, just like what we did in the draw length test with the bow, we want to get to a natural position here, and we don't want to adjust our body. And then we want to see where we're at with the equipment. All right, so when we put this into practice, we're going to go back to the information that we had in the last Tuesday's tip of the week, where we are looking at our float, studying what we see on target, and using that expansion test that we talked about in that video to be able to help us decide if we are too long or too short, see what our sight picture is doing upon expansion, upon creating some body tension in there, if we're able to settle down or not. And that's what's going to help us. If you're struggling with that, if you don't want to self-diagnose it, if you want some guidance on it, reach out to me, let me know. My email is down in the description of this video. I have coaching packages just for setting up your draw length, your loop length, and getting the bow to fit you correctly. So We can do that. We can, go through an entire overall process, whatever you are comfortable with. But guys, I appreciate you watching. We've got one more video before the hopefully special episode that I can come out with for our 100th Tuesday's Tip of the Week. I'm going to try to get some live coaching done on that one, get some more aspects to let you see another archer while I'm working with them, and hopefully go through that process with them. Members of this channel, I've got some special content planned coming out for you over some target panic, working with an archer, kind of their guidance, their path, some stuff that's going on with that as well. In next week's video, we will expand on this a little bit more and start talking about natural points of aim. And then also, if you're struggling with bobbing up and down on target and losing some pressure and having some issues with your shot like that. Thank you. I'll see you soon.